Okay, so we're really privileged to be able now to move into our first keynote, and it's my pleasure to introduce our morning keynote speaker, Dr. David Madigan from Northeastern University. David Madigan is the Provost and Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs at Northeastern University. Prior to joining Northeastern, he was Professor of Statistics, Executive Vice President of Arts and Sciences, and Dean of the Faculty at Columbia University, my alma mater. He received a bachelor's degree in mathematics and a PhD in statistics, both from Trinity College, Dublin. He previously worked at AT&T, Soliloquy, the University of Washington, Rutgers University, and Skillsoft. He has over 200 publications in areas such as Bayesian statistics, text mining, Monte Carlo methods. You could be a computer scientist, you know. Pharmacovigilance, that's actually something I hadn't heard of before, but that sounds pretty interesting, and probabilistic graphical models. He's an elected fellow of the American Statistical Association, the Institute for Mathematical Statistics, and the American Association for the Advancement of Science. He served terms as editor-in-chief of Statistical Science and also of Statistical Analysis and Data Mining, the ASA Data Science Journal. Oh, great. Northeastern University, as we all know here, has really been one of the pioneers in flexible learning through NewFlex, and so we're particularly pleased to be able to have David here and Constance, who I'll be introducing shortly for our panel at our summit. Following David's talk here, we're going to have an opportunity for questions, and again, this is a flex event, so we've got a room full of people here and a room full of people who are online virtually. So there'll be an opportunity for questions. So while you're listening to David, if you have questions, comments online or in person, think about them. We have an opportunity to pose questions live here, and there's a question and answer button in the bottom right-hand side of your Zoom window where you can enter questions, and we'll be handling questions as well and posing them to David. So, David, without any further ado, let me welcome you here. Thank you again so much for being here. We're really looking forward to your remarks.
Good morning, everyone. I'm actually a computer scientist wannabe, someday. Thank you for that kind introduction. I'm extremely happy to be here and here on your beautiful campus in this beautiful building. It's gorgeous. So I'm here basically to tell you a bit about our recent experience at Northeastern in using flex modalities, which I'll describe. And then, because you're giving me the podium, I'm also going to tell you a little bit about where we think we're headed and some ideas in that direction. I'm here with Connie Yowell, who's the Senior Vice Chancellor for Educational Innovation. She's the real expert. And we'll be together on the panel, but I might be directing some of the questions at Connie. I guess it's fine to interrupt me if you want along the way, too. Okay, so I'll begin by just telling you a bit about, let me keep an eye on time, what's going on at Northeastern, what we've been doing in the last year or two. The work that we're doing is, in the context of a law. It's related to educational technology, the things that technology enables us to do. There is a long arc. I guess I can see it over there. There we go. Then the camera will be off probably. I better stay where I am. I wish I were 6 inches taller, then I could see this. There's a long arc of educational technology, and dating back, if you will, to the abacus, but with lots of different things, along the way. So it's not, there is an arc here. It's not like that. This is the first time in the. Thank you. That's much better. It appeared on the second screen. We're entering an era of the metaverse and VR and AR, which I will say more about, in a few minutes. But there is a history here and an arc. It's worth actually, it's interesting to dig into some of this history. So correspondence courses were all the rage in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Apparently, by the 1920s, there were 4 times as many people taking correspondence courses as were enrolled in the nation's colleges and universities combined. This is quite the wave at the time. There's a little kind of bragging quote there from the University of Chicago had a major correspondence school. There's a quote from them there that I won't read. But the statistic at the bottom, I think, is kind of interesting. They were very concerned about completion rates. Does this sound familiar? 2.6% completion rates for correspondence courses. So I guess there's nothing new under the sun. That was followed by a wave, no pun intended, of radio education by radio. It is no imaginary dream to picture the school of tomorrow as an entirely different institution from that of today because of the use of radio in teaching. So that was a big wave. There followed then, I'm not going to go through it all, there was a TV wave. For those of you from the other side of the Atlantic, Open University was a huge, prominent institution. It still is, but for different reasons. In the UK, they had broadcast TV channels where you could take your courses and so on. So I think it's just interesting to ponder this past and to think about what we're doing in the context of all of these previous efforts. So at Northeastern, we very much have embraced the so-called HyFlex model. I believe this term was coined by a gentleman called Brian Beatty at San Francisco State University, who wrote a very short little interesting book about this. It's basically the concept is that there's a classroom with an instructor and some students, but there's remote participation. So you basically have cameras and microphones in the room that enable remote participation. So that's the basic HyFlex model, and I think it's part of the mix here. Your flex is obviously more broadly defined than this, but HyFlex is this particular modality. So this is kind of what we embraced at Northeastern, starting in 2020. We had been doing it for many years in small ways, kind of here and there. So we did have some of the. A minority of the classrooms had this kind of technology that enabled remote participation, and there's decades of experience of various kinds of online education, as you might expect, at Northeastern. A lot of this, there's a deep commitment, institutional commitment at Northeastern to providing flexibility for both students and faculty. The history of Northeastern now is an R1 university. But as recently as 25 years ago, it was a very different place. It was a commuter school, and was that way for its first 80 years or whatever. So it was very much about working professionals, serving the Boston market and so on. So there's these kind of deep roots of understanding that your students are not necessarily captive students living on your campus. So that's kind of deep in the DNA of the place. So that's kind of what I'm just describing is kind of the state of affairs, let's say, as of March 2020. Pandemic hits. We very much do not want to crawl under a rock and want to provide, find some way to stay open in the fall of 2020. That's really what the driving force was for this, what we call NUFlex, which is a version of HyFlex. So we, to stay open, we had classroom capacity, per the state and federal guidelines. Classroom capacity was at about 30%. So we couldn't, if we had all the students back, which we did, we couldn't have them in the classrooms simultaneously. So we needed NUFlex. To serve our students, and we allocated the spots in the classrooms, and then other students were participating using NUFlex. Northeastern, you may or may not be aware, but Northeastern 20 years ago was actually as recently as 10 years ago, was 100% a Boston institution. But in the last 10 years, Northeastern has established campuses all around, all around North America. Including Canada, one in Toronto, one in Vancouver, and we also have a London campus. These are not insignificant campuses. So we have a couple of thousand students in Vancouver right now. We have more than 1,000 students in Toronto, more than 1,000, actually 2,000 in Seattle, and so on. So one of the things, the kind of revelations about NUFlex was now we can serve a student anywhere in the campus network can take a class anywhere else on the campus network. And in fact, it became apparent that we have to have this. Like, we cannot teach every class on every campus. So we absolutely need this technology in order to serve our students, scattered around the Western world and in the future, around the globe. So we in short order in the summer of 2020 installed fairly high-end cameras, microphones, and cameras that tracked people in the room, would zoom in on the speaker, etc. We kitted out essentially every class on all our campuses, with the NUFLEX technology. We did fairly extensive training for faculty in the use of this technology over that summer. The cost was about $20 million. So the investment in the equipment, was of that order. In the summer of 2020, the campus was, at least the Boston campus, there were contractors crawling all over it, installing, there were power cabinets that had to be added in the classrooms to support the equipment, and so on and so forth. We also built a fairly significant tech stack. It's the computer scientist in me again, which, for example, we had, in a given class, a third of the students could attend in person, and 2/3 of them were doing it from their dorm room or wherever. We needed to rotate the students through the available spaces, so we created this dynamic scheduler that allowed students to express their preferences. I want to be in class on the Tuesday morning, but not on the Thursday afternoon, etc. And then it would allocate the spots to the students, etc. There were many kind of tech aspects to this to support the NUFLEX endeavor. A very interesting thing happened, which was a shock to us. So about 90% of the students showed up in the fall of 2020, which is prime COVID time. So the drive to be on campus and to be with their fellow students was intense. And they were just so grateful to not be in their parents' basement. But the 1/3 of the seats that were available in the classrooms, that we built this fancy dynamic scheduler and all the rest of it, nah, not so interested. There were a hardcore of students who wanted the spots and would show up into class, but they were rare. The 1/3 was rarely full. So the students wanted desperately to be back, to be on campus, did not so desperately want to be in class, and it is one of the major learnings from that experience. So we did that for a whole year. We were still doing it a bit in this academic year, the fall of 2021, with, generally speaking, mixed results. So we stayed open, we functioned. It enabled participation from other campuses, cross-campus participation. But the data, the evaluation data are very mixed. So let me give you a flavor of this briefly. I need to move on. So, how can I do this? Do it here. So, for example, kind of the major result. How much do you like teaching a NUFLEX course? 48%, so close to half of the faculty that we surveyed, reported that they disliked it a great deal or they disliked it somewhat. So there was limited enthusiasm for this. There were a significant minority that that enjoyed it, and we had some folks. I'll show you a picture in a second. We had some folks who reveled in it. Faculty who used it in all kinds of innovative ways. Were building connections between the online students and the in-person students, and so on. But for most faculty members, the issue basically was, actually, let me go forward one and then I'll go back. The challenges that they found were, facilitating interactions and engaging with both in-person and remote students during class sessions. I'm sure you're hearing this here as well. And you've probably experienced it yourself. It's difficult. It's difficult to engage with an audience in front of you and at the same time cater to a Brady Bunch wall in front of you with all the faces. So that we heard this over and over again, that it's hard. We'd much rather deal with 100% in person or 100% online, but this mixed modality is difficult. Other challenges you see there: building relationships with students, classroom management with both in-person and remote students, the same basic issue again. So that was kind of the overarching theme, and that is why people were not wildly enthusiastic about this. They did, though, there were things that people liked. So the faculty appreciated that it provides extraordinary flexibility for students. You see the second one there, which is a very interesting one: providing flexibility for faculty. So you might scratch your head and think, well, why? Well, why? Right? You have to come to class and be in the classroom, with these mixed modality. And the answer is, if you talk about NUFLEX on the Northeastern campus, many faculty think that means they can be remote, and that began to happen quite a bit. So in particular, as the students tended to not show up in large numbers in class, faculty tended to drift into, well, then what's the point in me coming to campus at the height of COVID to have 3 students in front of me and 43 online? So there was a bit of drift over the course of the year, in that general direction. So, this is just an example of some of the kind of innovative things folks did. This was a dance class, I believe, where the students were doing all kinds of, they were filming themselves in their gardens and outside and all over the place. So people found innovative ways to use this technology. Movement for the Actor was an acting class. So let me just put these all up together. So what did we learn from this? First of all, technology does not automatically lead to a transformation. So there was drift over the course of the year. Just because you have this technology in the classroom does not mean that all faculty are going to embrace it and use it fully. Has provoked, and I'll say a little more about it in the next few minutes, all kinds of discussions that had never happened before about the notions of time and place in our learning environments. And you alluded to it, Jim, in your comments, earlier about this kind of spectrum all the way from synchronous to asynchronous, in person, online, and so on. So we've been having, I'll say more about it. It has provoked vigorous discussions, at Northeastern. And the role of faculty is also changing. So Northeastern takes a highly experiential approach to education. Co-op, which you may have heard of, is a major feature of a Northeastern education. So most Northeastern undergraduates do 2 or even 3 6-month co-ops. So they're out there, they're in the world, engaged in experiential learning. There are no faculty out there when they're on co-op, but yet we want to use this technology to engage the students. They could take classes using NUFLEX while they were on co-op. So that, the role of the importance of peer tutoring, of learning situations in the world where there isn't necessarily an instructor there is, that our thinking on that front is also, evolving. Also how we evaluate our teaching and learning needs to change in this, era that's supported by technology. So what's next? We don't know what's next, but let me share some ideas that we've been kicking around in the last few months, provoked by our experiences in recent times. So Kevin Kelly, the founder of Wired magazine, amongst other things, talks about things that are in technology that are inevitable and things that are not inevitable. So the internet was inevitable, but Facebook was not. The internet was bound to happen, but Facebook might not have happened. There would have been other types of platforms. Mobile phones and smartphones were bound to happen, inevitable that technology is going in that direction. The iPhone is not inevitable. The iPhone might never have been invented. So it's just interesting to think about things that are noteworthy, if you would, like the iPhone, but not necessarily inevitable, and try to think through what is inevitable in terms of educational technology and technology-supported learning. So here's what we think are inevitable trends that are going to change the nature of our learning environments. So humans and machines. So we're moving to an era where it's humans working with machines. It's not you go to your computer and you use it to do something or to accomplish something. We'll be working with technology to accomplish things. Digital economies, we're clearly moving to economies that are driven by information flow and highly digital in nature rather than physical. Global interconnectedness. So globalization, which I used to certainly, as in years gone by, was a total believer, all in on globalization. I'm more sanguine about it these days, but global interconnectedness is a different matter. I mean, that seems inevitable, that we are just going to become ever more interconnected as a world. Immersive experiences, VR, AR, is here to stay. I'm going to say a few more things about that in my last few minutes. Distributed systems, wireless Internet of Things, devices all over our bodies and our lives. It seems like an absolute inevitability. And also this idea of a physical and a digital identity, avatars, and you have digital presences that are distinct from your physical identity. So we could discuss all of these, but perhaps these are inevitable forces. So what are the implications for education? Let me give just a couple of these are essentially eye candy. A couple of quick examples. This is a technology that does evaluation of presenters. Which is, if we have this kind of evaluation for all of our instructors, I think it would be very interesting. Is this what the classroom of the future is going to look like? So, this is a classroom with a bunch of, avatars representing real people, but there's also a real person, in the mix who happens to be remote. So is this where we're headed in terms of what our learning environments will look like? There is an enormous amount of activity in this space right now, in innovation in educational technology, that for the most part has not arrived in higher education. And it is inevitable that these kinds of technologies are going to profoundly change what we do. There isn't a huge amount of hard evaluation about the power of AR, VR, and related kinds of techniques. This is one particular study, which there isn't a link there, but I can get anyone the link who wants it. It's an interesting study that comes out of PwC about using AR and VR and XR and so on in professional learning environments, teaching people skills like diversity, equity, and inclusion kinds of training, or technology training, and so on. That these tools dramatically increase, effectiveness, as compared with standard classroom instruction. So I'll skip that one. This wave is out there, and it is going to wash over higher education. Let me finally just pivot to talk a bit about more Northeastern specific and how we're thinking about this technology avalanche that's coming at us. So Northeastern is, the strategic plan for Northeastern that was updated very recently and adopted by the board. The North Star for Northeastern is very much impact. So the university exists to have positive impact in the world. Positive impact both through our research enterprise around the campus network, directly, and then vicariously through our students. If you're going to maximize your impact in the world, you have to be in the world. Hence the campus network, for example. So you're not going to maximize your impact in the world by sitting inside your campus and occasionally tossing some papers over the wall. You got to engage and be in the world. The pillars of this strategic plan are one, personalized experiential learning. So we're moving to and this is student driven. The students are increasingly demanding, they want their own path. They don't want to have to do a cookie cutter major where you do these 3 courses this year and those 4 courses next year and so on. Want it highly personalized. They also wanted, and we want it to be experiential throughout. So right now it's the experiential part of a Northeastern education is very kind of episodic. You're on campus for a while, then you go on co-op. Then you go out, then you come back to campus, then you go out on co-op. So instead, we're imagining a Northeastern education experience that is experiential throughout, which comes back to the comment I made earlier about the central role of the instructor. If it's experiential throughout, it won't be always with an instructor holding your hand. On the research side, we're increasingly focused on what we call impact engines. So the idea is it's not to begin with the disciplines and the departments, begin with problems in the world and organize ourselves around those problems in the world, bring to bear the disciplines. We need we desperately need the mathematicians and the biologists and the psychologists and the historians and so on, but we need them together, focused on problems in the world. So we're calling these impact engines that are also, students are heavily involved in these impact engines. So it's part of the experiential education, at Northeastern, all powered by a global university system. Jim is getting nervous there. I've got about 5 minutes, and then I'll be done. We're good. Okay. I made that point already. So this is what we imagine, is more kind of schematically what a Northeastern education might look like in the future. So experiential learning is at the core of it. There are courses, there's co-op and different forms of co-op. Right now it's 100% you're on co-op or 100% you're not on co-op. Going forward, it'll be a much more mixed kind of environment. And we're also imagining that our students will be much more community engaged going forward. What's technology got to do with, just to bring it back to the topic, what's technology got to do with this? We can't do any of this without rethinking our learning environments and the way in which we deliver education to our students. The role of the classroom with an instructor at the top there is a role for that, but one assumes that will not be the central modality in which the students learn. Some of these kind of axes were already alluded to in the opening remarks, but if you think about space, time, and place, so learning can take place in a physical environment like a classroom, but it can also take place in a virtual environment. We have this kind of hard dichotomy in our thinking, at least I do, and I'm trying to get away from it, between online and in person. We're going to be in mixed modalities, so it's going to be the case, clearly it already is to some extent and enabled by NUFLEX, where it's going to be a mix of physical activities, physical interactions with activities in a virtual space, synchronous versus asynchronous. So we think online is largely asynchronous, in person is synchronous. We're going to be switching between these two. I think we're going to be in the middle for the most part, going forward. And finally, just in terms of place, classrooms will play a role, but given what I've just described about the experiential focus, of a Northeastern education, it's going to be mixed. It's going to be sometime on campus, one of our campuses, and other times, in the world. Technology is what's going to enable this and enable these seamless transitions between these poles. Particular things that we're experimenting with right now, work-integrated learning. So we very much want our students to continue to interact with the university while they're in the world, while they're on co-op specifically. We're doing a lot of work around XR, virtual reality, augmented reality, and so on. I'll show a quick video clip in a second just to illustrate that. And then real-world experiences alongside avatars and possibly holograms, where the notion of physical presence now changes. So it's not just a student physically in a room, but a student can have an avatar in a room or an avatar in a virtual situation where they're communicating with fellow students or with an instructor. Can you play the video? I'll probably stop this after a couple of minutes. Just want to give you a flavor of some of the kinds of things that are possible with these tools.
When I saw the HoloLens, I thought to myself, how can I apply this to my teaching? And can I apply it to research? And both of those questions are answered yes. The HoloLens has really emphasized the power of visual learning in a specific space, but not actually having to be there.
I never really learn too much from just the text. I just have to see it, observe it once, and I'll get the hang of it.
HoloLens really allows us to take learning and coaching to a next level that we really have never been able to do before.
This is the HoloLens, and as you can see, sort of the way that it works is you've got this visor here. And this is a computer So if I put it on, just lower the visor, and automatically the HoloLens recognizes that it's me who's using the device. It recognizes through its iris recognition.
When we began to talk with the Microsoft HoloLens team, we immediately saw that the HoloLens and augmented and mixed reality could really help us advance experiential teaching and learning into new settings that we haven't really been able to support before.
This is what I would call a P1000.
What we were trying to do with the Biotechnology Application Lab pilot was to work with Dr. Auclair on developing a guide around pipetting, specifically sort of an introduction to pipetting technique.
It would take me 3 hours to train somebody to do a really simple technique inside the lab, which is actually a really long time. We can give them the HoloLens and they can go through the program on their own, being guided by guides, which is the beauty of it. I don't have to be there. And then we can bring them in the lab and ensure that they've been trained properly, and cut that 3 hours down to 30 minutes.
Let's stop it there.
Augmented reality is super cool because you can add.
I can provide the link for anyone who's interested. You can watch the whole thing. But I just wanted to give you a flavor of the power of some of these AR, VR technologies. Finally, last slide. There's so much that we don't know, and so much that I think we all have to learn. Issues to do with quality and outcomes in these kinds of mixed environments. There are very complicated equity and social justice implications, particularly with the use of kind of something like HoloLens, not cheap. How do we deploy this? How do we ensure access? Can students still connect and make meaning in these kinds of complex, hybrid environments? What's the role for passive consumption of knowledge? Actually, Connie and I were talking about this in the car on the way over here. Will we have lectures? Will we have someone, a sage on the stage talking to students sitting in chairs bolted to the floor with, an entirely passive experience? Is there a role for that, going forward? So many open questions. I'll stop there. I'm happy to take questions, and Connie can help me with those. Yeah. Okay. I'm sure there'll be many questions I can't answer.
Is this mic live?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we've got actually plenty of time to, first of all, thank you very much for just a really outstanding presentation. And the first comment that we got online, it was not actually a question, but just a comment, so I'll read it to you. Brilliant presentation. Thank you for sharing this. And
good job, Connie.
So we have the opportunity for folks here, if they'd like to come and queue up by the mic to ask questions, make comments, anything like that. We have a number of questions online. So while folks, don't be shy, we're all faculty and students and staff, and we all know what it's like to be in a classroom. So please come up and make comments. I'll read you maybe, there are a couple of questions that have already come up online, and so maybe I'll queue up one or two from you. The first comes from one of our geoscience faculty members at the Mount Ida campus. Thanks for sharing the NewFlex experience and this great talk. Well, he had to leave, but he's going to watch your answer, but ask that we ask you this question. It's flexible, right?
It's flexible,
asynchronous. A totally asynchronous. Matter of fact, we're using all three modalities here by asking and answering this question, okay? This has to do with students on campus, and the question of coming back to campus and the importance of technological support that students might need. So maybe it also relates to, your vision of a technology-rich future. I teach mostly technology-heavy courses, and this is the main challenge I see among my asynchronous students. If they're away from campus, they are also away from the computer labs and the kind of assistance they might get on campus. And what's your experience with that?
So we certainly had challenges. We did have students, as I said, about 90% of the students came back. That means 10% of them didn't. So, a significant number of learners were not on campus, and we did have some challenges in terms of supporting them. We had challenges with bandwidth. So, these students were scattered all over the world. you know, with different levels of connectivity. I think that was actually probably the single biggest challenge. Just to not answer the question, but to answer a different question, the bigger problems were actually more on the instructor side. So the technology, actually I didn't say this when I was making my remarks about EnuFlex. In so many ways, the technology we have now feels Stone Age. You know, it's a camera, it's a few microphones, it's some screens. It's way short of a truly immersive experience for the students. It's also kind of clunky. So, you know, faculty members would come in with their iPad or with their laptop. They'd have difficulty connecting it. We had we had several hundred trained student helpers who could get to a classroom within 3 minutes or something. I can't remember what our target was. They were constantly in use because we were having constant problems with people just getting this thing fired up. The students online would be saying, we can't see anything or we can't hear or whatever. So it was clunky. And you know, we had real challenges in that regard. It got better as the year went on, but it never went away. So this has to be seamless, right? It has to, for the HyFlex type, where there's an instructor going into a classroom and remote students, you know, it has to be the case that the instructor walks into the room and it works. It works instantly and perfectly. And you know, we had real challenges in that regard.
So certainly during fall of 20 and probably spring 21 as well, you had no choice because of the regulations and rules that you couldn't have students beyond a certain density. And so I assume that almost everyone had to go into the NewFlex mode. Post those restrictions, is it optional for faculty members to be offering this, you know, dual mode or HyFlex, or is everyone expected to operate in HyFlex?
So we had you know, intense discussions around this in the fall of this year. You know, there's a huge, you know, the flexibility and the convenience for students is incredible. So we urged faculty, and we also had, you know, in the fall, you know, a significant number of students at any given time who had COVID or were you know, had a close contact and were quarantining, et cetera, et cetera. So we had more students than usual who couldn't come to class. So, you know, we urged faculty to take care of those students. We urged them to use the technology. We didn't make it mandatory. And I think in reality, the lecture recording capability, which is kind of part and parcel of the technology suite, was widely used, but NewFlex, not so much. I don't know, Connie, if you have any statistics, but you know, the usage was minimal. And as I said, we didn't mandate it. It's a very mixed, I hope I'm communicating, you know, it's a very mixed story. We have a long way to go here.
Hi, I'm James Allen in computer science. The statistics you showed said that about a third of the faculty loved the NewFlex thing and about half the faculty disliked it. Do you have a sense of whether there were, was it because of different styles of teaching? So that the people who just wanted to do a big lecture thing loved it, and the people who had small group discussions or medium group discussions didn't? Or was it STEM were happy with it, and the humanities? You know, is there any characteristics of these that differentiate between them? And I also want to point out that by letting me ask this question, Jim, you're doing the classic mistake we make in hybrid education, which is to ignore the remote people. Because you said there were several other questions.
Connie might be able to speak to this better than I can, but there weren't any striking patterns. We did look at this. We sliced and diced it in various ways, and you know, there weren't any particularly striking. You know, it was the STEM people loved it and the humanities people hated it, or vice versa. It wasn't like that. You know, I think for many faculty, you know, they've been teaching their course for years, they've got their PowerPoint, you know, they walk into the room and they keep doing what they always did. You know, and which is to say they're basically looking at the students in front of them. And it's, you know, it's a lot of effort to change to change the way you teach. And that's what was needed. By contrast, and I'm sure some of these people who said they loved it, we had people who reveled in it. So I remember I attended a class, she's a political scientist, a brilliant political scientist, Denise Garcia. I sat in on one of her classes. It was incredible. It was a master class. So she had the students online, talking to students, texting private chat with students in the classroom, and then presenting their solutions to a particular problem or whatever. So she was very actively bridging the gap. She was absolutely not ignoring the students online, and weaving them into it. So I think, but that is not what the majority experience was like. So it's that comment that I had on a slide there. The technology alone, you can put the technology in place, but that doesn't mean that that what goes on changes, and it has to change. If you just go in and do business as usual, it's very unsatisfactory.
Great. So, James, I'm going to say that was not a mistake on my part. You're my department chair, Swami's my chancellor, and if you two want to ask questions, you get to go. We do have a number of questions from off campus again, and I'm going to read. Actually, a couple of them are related to each other. And so one is from Tricia Serio, who's our Dean of the College of Natural Sciences and our provost-to-be, so maybe it's sort of almost a provost-to-provost type of question. And she's asking a question about student outcomes. And then there's another question related to that by Rayla Raja, who's in our political science department, who had a similar question. So I'm going to read these as a pair to you. The transition during the pandemic was a large-scale experiment. Have you been able to analyze what worked and what was less effective in terms of student success? Rayla Raja says, has Northeastern done any research on student learning outcomes across modalities or particular concerns they raise with different modalities? So I think maybe taking the student perspective on both of those.
So Connie can address this better than I can, but so we didn't do as good a job as we might have done, even though we're all scholars and scientists, of studying this, and in part because we were in panic mode in the fall of 2020. So it was kind of all hands on deck just to get this working. We've done fairly extensive student surveying. Connie, do you want to comment?
Yeah. What I would say is that
do you want to come to the aim or up here? Come on, just come up here.
I have kids. I'm usually pretty loud. Well, they're off campus. Right. Your point. Yeah. I'll just go here. Thanks. Our surveys, we didn't look extensively. We're just starting to, in various ways, look extensively at our own student data, both coming off of Canvas and our outcomes to see where the differences are. So we don't have a lot to report out there. There's a researcher at UC Irvine, Richard Aram, who's been doing a large-scale study as well. Richard's findings across a set of universities indicate that from the online outcomes, the outcomes in terms of learning have been fairly okay between the online and the offline, the in-classroom versus the HyFlex. Where he sees massive discrepancies are around where you would imagine emotional well-being, mental health, all the things that come from socializing and being in person. And so that's where we've seen, and we've all seen lots of studies on the mental health coming out of COVID. That's where we see a lot of discrepancies.
Thanks, Connie.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Shekhar Regvi. I'm from University Without Walls. My question is, as you mentioned, the experiential learning. What is the modality of that learning? It is a teaching philosophy or learning philosophy? Where the student stand on that experiential learning? How we make sure they learn from that experience?
Again, Connie is the expert here. Do you want to comment on that?
Sure.
It's a great question.
At Northeastern, we have a very simple definition of experiential learning. We talk about experiential learning as when a learner comes in contact with the world and transformation happens. For the world, we call that impact, and for the learner, the student, we call that learning. Generally, the way we talk about it is that three things have to happen at the intersection, is that the student has to be learning and building skills related to competency. They have to be a part of a community that is sharing that desire to learn and get better so that there's a feeling of belonging and that they're seeing some relevance in the world. So there are actually three things that need to be measured in experiential learning. The hardest thing about experiential learning is that as faculty and as assessment folks, we don't know how to identify the learning that's happening because it's more complicated. And so it's less a question of does learning happen during experiential learning, it's more a question for us as assessors in terms of how do we come to understand that learning has happened. And so we do at Northeastern, we do some pre and post learning opportunities, and we look at things like collaboration, critical thinking, a whole set of other skills in addition to core competencies. We might call them hard skills when it comes to that. So you have to be able to do both of those.
Okay. So my thing is, when we say the experiential learning, outcomes of the learning, you are in an experience like going to a hands-on work experience, and then there should be the processing of learning where the learner reflect on that experience and make connection with that, whether they learn something or the question about it. Did they relearning or maybe not learning? Experience is not enough of learning. People may be reaching experience, but not learning at all. How those competency as an instructor we, generate. So make sure that people have a space to critically thinking about it, making a meaning of it, and changing the learning hypothesis, and become a learner, not an experience as a recipe.
Yeah, good. Yeah, not just a consumer of experience. Yeah, I agree.
And then about the you program have students to go there, to go to the experiential site, and they come back to the classroom and then discuss about that experience.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, very much so. So there's a on ramp and an off ramp for the co-op experience.
Yeah. And then they have to have to the exam or the write a paper or how that experience. Yeah. Or
They do a reflection piece.
Okay.
Yep.
And that will be the outcomes of that learning. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you for that question. The next question comes from Anne-Marie Duchamp, who's in Disability Services here. She says, how did Northeastern take on the challenge of additional students utilizing the same resources? What's the plan for supporting additional staffing to attend to the growth in student needs? Remote learning provides wonderful opportunities to our students, especially those with disabilities. How is the university planning to enhance faculty response to accommodation needs with the expansion of remote and hybrid learning? Will there be additional training provided and/or required of faculty in accessible instruction in person, remote, hybrid? So there's a whole bunch of questions there. You could pick ones that you particularly would like to answer.
Let me actually zero in on one piece, which is actually Connie's initiative, and Connie can speak much better to it than I can, but let me just describe it briefly. So we have what we call the Student Success Initiative. So it's right now targeting our freshmen, and it's basically a concierge advising service that one of the problems that we have, and I've been at, this is the fourth university I've worked at, I've seen this in all of them, I have this sneaking suspicion it might be true here as well, that it's bewildering to students. The array of services that's available to them is enormous, but it's very difficult for students to navigate it. So they go to one office, and they're actually at Rutgers, where I used to be, they call it the RU screw, they used to call it. We've a different name for it at Northeastern that's also impolite. But you getting shuffled from office to office, just the sheer complexity of it is extraordinary. So the idea of the student concierge service is that there is a concierge, a trained peer, who is their job, who does know the entire, they've been trained, they know the entire suite of services, and basically helps you navigate it. So you're not on your own. Do you want to add anything about that?
Yeah, there are two parts to it.
The microphone for the audience.
Yeah, I'll hold my way to the microphone. I may stand next to David. Sorry about that. Yeah, there are a couple parts to it as we've been working on coming out of COVID and NewFlex and understanding the mental health and well-being of our students as well, and also their need, if students have needs for extra services. And so the idea is to take a concierge approach that blends into it a notion of supportive accountability. So the idea is that all of our students coming in are now paired with a student support guide, a peer mentor, who's been at the university as a third or fourth year student and has been trained in knowing the university well and can refer and stay in close touch with the student. One of the things that we know from students, though, is that referral means nothing. and that the question is follow-up and knowing whether or not they actually receive the services. So we call this supportive accountability. So the additional piece of this is that the peer mentor is responsible for also checking in with the student on a weekly basis to say, how did that go? Did you get what you needed? Did you follow up? Do you need more help? And just this little bit of supportive accountability, it turns out, changes the engagement with services by almost 95%. And so the whole idea is both that you've got a constant person to touch base with, to give you referrals, help you understand the system, but then comes back and says, how did it go? And that turns out to be the critical piece. Could I ask you what?
So we have time for one more question, but maybe if I could ask you just a quick follow-up question. That concierge service, is that available in a flexible modality, and it's available to students who are both on campus and off campus?
That's right. That's right. So we're actually, there's a faculty member at UMass Boston. Her name is Jean Rhodes. And Jean is one of the leading scholars in the world on mentoring. So we've partnered with Jean, and we're using an app called Mentor Hub, which actually is all online. And so the interaction with the peer guide is actually virtual. And it has a chat mechanism for constant engagement. So yes, it's both in person and virtual.
Hi, I'm Melissa Garrett Preston, UWW. You just asked my question, so I'm going to pivot. How do you see things like Google, LinkedIn? How are they going to interface with what you're trying to do at Northeastern? And as they are trying to disrupt higher ed and different kinds of educational experiences.
Thank you. So particularly in the professional, leave aside the undergraduate realm for a second, but in the professional education realm, where Northeastern has very significant programs and activities across the campus network, we, for sure, we see, not necessarily the demise, but certainly the decline of the cookie cutter degree. So the master's degree, as defined by our accreditors, is going to be, I think, is going to become less and less important, and we're going to move to a world of badges and modules and stackable educational credentials and so on. And I think they're going to eat our lunch if we don't wake up, basically, is what I think is going to happen. I do not think 10 years from now or 20 years from now we're going to have anything like the same demand for, in particular, a full-time graduate degree. Like, I just do not see students in the future, young people early in their careers, abandoning those careers for a year or two to go and be at a university for a year or two. I just think that's going to go away.
And the undergrad?
I don't know. That's it's one of the learnings, if you will, I think from COVID is the desire to have this residential experience is incredible. Much more powerful than I think any of us understood, prior to COVID. So. I'm a bit more optimistic for the future of the residential experience. 4 years, I think it'll be much more. I think it's likely to be much more flexible in the future, so that that undergraduate experience might be spread out over a longer period of time. With students coming and going, learners in and out, or it may become much more accelerated and intense. So, like we teach, I don't know what you do here, but I imagine it's about 30 weeks of the year or something like that. What's with that? Why are we not going 52 weeks, in the year? And there will be, I think, highly accelerated forms of the undergraduate experience. I think it'll just become broken. It won't be that. Right now it's pretty uniform, 4-year experience, at least in the United States. I don't think that's going to survive.
Okay, well, David, thank you again, really, for a fabulous talk and a really rich discussion here afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you.